Hello, happy Monday, good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another Veeam live stream. I'm pleased to be joined by special guest Dan Thompson from 451 Research. How are you today, Dan?
I'm excellent. Thank you, sir.
Hey, so you are coming to us live from Tennessee in the United States, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Brilliant. I am recently moved back to Colorado, Boulder, actually. Did a few live streams in Boulder over the summer. And the reason that I'm mentioning all this is because we're actually going to populate a world map. If you've not seen some of the live streams before, you can see we've already filled in Colorado and Tennessee. We've got our producer in Georgia. We've got another one of our colleagues over in Europe. So as you're going through the live stream here, feel free to drop in the comments section where you're from, and we'll revisit this from time to time as Dan and I are chatting. But our goal, of course, is to always turn as much of this green as we possibly can. And with that said, I also want to encourage people, please feel free to type in your questions. I will go back afterwards if we're not able to get to it live. Well, I'll be able to come back after the fact and address your questions as well. So we definitely encourage the interaction. But before we get too far into things, Dan, for people that might not be familiar with yourself or with 451 Research, we've got a slide, but most importantly, love just to have you walk us through a little bit about yourself and 451.
Yeah, sure. So again, you mentioned Dan Thompson. I'm the principal research analyst here at 451 on the multi-tenant data center team, actually. And so you may hear that and be asking yourself, well, what in the world does data centers have to do with, with what it is we're talking about today? So actually, before joining the team at 451, I worked for a managed and cloud service provider for over a decade, actually, and so I bring to the table sort of the way of thinking of the service providers. Also, many data center providers these days are managed service providers as well, and so you can think of it as experience on my part, both from a buyer perspective and from now looking at the seller's perspective. So anyway, so that's the background that I'm bringing with me today. 451 Research is an industry research firm. It's particularly focused on the technology segment. Back in January, we were acquired by S&P Global, and now are part of their Market Insight division. So much part of a much larger organization now, and we cover everything from energy to technology to I mean, it's a tremendous amount of topics that the market intelligence covers, but particularly what we have been focused on traditionally at 451 are emerging technologies, newer companies, things that are maybe not on the radar of some of the larger, or at the time larger, research firms. So in any case, that's who I am and who we are.
Excellent. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that you're quite a photographer as well. I think it was either Saturday or yesterday I saw on Twitter a really beautiful park picture that you've taken. So outdoor photography, I should specify that, but nature.
Yeah. So I do, hobbyist photographer. It's just been a passion of mine for years and years, frankly, and I just love to tell visual stories. And there's just something about the medium that is interesting to me, and I'm also like a bit of a travel nerd, and so for me, it's an opportunity to share the world with people who may not, have that opportunity to travel, and they'll see things that maybe they've never seen before, and hear stories that they've never heard before. So it's definitely a particular passion of mine.
Well, that's very cool. And that's pretty common too. A lot of times the engineering mindset, we're very visual, or we've also got, an interest in music, chess, arts, things of that nature. So definitely pretty common. So we'll do the map check in just a little bit here, but let's tee up one very interesting bit of survey work that you've done. And that has to do with service providers or managed service providers in the enterprise in particular. Maybe you could take us through a little bit of that recent research.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. So as part of 451 research, we have a couple of different survey groups that we talk to. And one of those is just purely the enterprise segment. So we call that the voice of the enterprise. We also have a panel where we just talked to service providers. And lo and behold, we've asked them similar questions over the years, right? And so we found it very interesting when you kind of overlay the responses of those two groups to see, hey, is everybody on the same page about what it is that they're wanting and what it is that they believe that they're delivering? One of the more glaring, I would say, misalignments is what you see on your screen here. Essentially what we did is for the enterprises, we asked them, what is it that you're looking to service providers to do? How can they help you? What are they best suited for? And then the service providers, we asked them, what are your customers' most common pain points? Interesting way to go about it, but essentially what we're asking them to tell us is, what problem are you most often solving for your customers, or is it your perception that you're most commonly solving? And the misalignment here that is just glaring to me is that enterprises far and above, like they want a managed service provider to kind of free up their staff. Essentially, they're wanting them to relieve some burden from their IT staff, right? Like it's a constant conversation, Dave. I know you've heard this a million times. IT departments are stressed out, they're overworked. They just simply don't have enough resources, either manpower or technology. And so when they go to the managed service community, they're saying, hey, help me out. Do something so that my engineers can be freed up to kind of move up the stack and perhaps, better support my business applications rather than the underlying infrastructure.
What's kind of fascinating about that to me is, not the exact math, but it's almost a difference of like 2 to 1. Meaning, the enterprise thinks something is twice as important as does the service provider, or vice versa. Yeah. So we're not talking like a little bit of a gap or delta. It's actually reasonably, sizable here, kind of order of magnitude kind of a notion. And that's a little bit of hyperbole, but it's not too far off from the truth. The two are in complete alignment.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing, and I think what I would point to and what I would direct managed service providers to be thinking of is, like, to me, this is all about messaging, right? I mean, at the end of the day, whatever it is that your product is, like the net result is it will, or at least it should, if it's valuable, obviously, it should be relieving some burden of the enterprise IT staff. And really, it's how you communicate that. So I think it's well established now that enterprises are not looking for product pushers. They're not looking for companies that come in and just sell them the neatest, greatest, newest technology. As I've been saying, like they want you to come in and like legitimately help their IT staff and take away something from their list of hotspots. And so I think, as I was saying, like this is really about messaging. This is when you walk in, part of your selling strategy should be find the pain point and then address it, right? And so by addressing it is taking it away.
Sure. Yeah, offer value or provide an outcome. I want to ask you a quick question before we do. Let's pop to the map. I'm being told we've got about 18 or more now countries and or United States and Canadian cities. So, Dan, you may not have seen this before, but I got to tell you, South America and a large part of Europe and the Middle East, India, they show up week in and week out very strong. I mean, that might be one of the strongest showings that I've seen from South America. So hats off to our friends down there. But look, all over Europe, and obviously we're talking about a variety of time zones here. So really appreciate the strong interest, and it's been continuing on now for going on about a half a year. So we'll check back in with that, but please continue to put comments in there. And if you do have questions for Dan or myself, please throw those in there as well. So if we return back, Dan, just hypothetically, meaning you probably don't have empirical evidence, but what's your reaction to this mismatch? Meaning, do you think the challenges or 2020 circumstances have led to any difference or increase in that? Or do you think this has been the case for quite some time, even prior to this year?
It's definitely the case prior to the year. So the studies, the last two studies where we asked the same questions were actually at the end of 2019. So those numbers are actually pre-COVID. Okay. And what I would say is like, I think there's just this, I think there has been a misconception along the way as managed service providers have been acquired. And this is anecdotal, but this is kind of an observation. as managed service providers have been acquired by companies that at their foundation are not managed service providers, but are maybe vendors or other product type companies. Anytime that we as humans enter a situation that we're not familiar with, we have some default that we'll fall back to, right? And so it's my observation that many of these product type companies or vendor type companies, they just don't know how to position managed services. And so what they do is they drop back to their default, which is to say, hey, we have this widget and we want to sell it to you. Isn't it pretty? Don't you want to buy it? And so I think, there's an opportunity here for companies who have acquired managed services that have just kind of maybe picked up VARs along the way. I think there's an opportunity here for everybody to come back to the table and say, you know what, we're missing. We're missing on a communication front. And perhaps, there even needs to be some realignment inside these organizations to say, what we're offering, while we may be successful from a sales perspective, there's an opportunity here to further resonate with our customers and to bring more to the table than just this, the next, I sold the next whatever, the next widget or whatever. There's the whole point of a service provider is to provide a service, right. Which is more than a product, right?
So as we close off this topic, maybe it's worth mentioning that it could sound sort of basic, but if you are a data center professional, be very specific about what you're asking for. Instead of saying, well, I'm looking for a way to host XYZ application, why? What am I trying to get out of that? Is it because I'm staff constrained? Is it because I need help migrating to the next, Rev Exchange or whatever it may be? But get really clear so that there's less ambiguities. I think what you're saying is, remove the gray.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent observation. And I would say, this notion of relational selling has been around for quite some time. It's something that I'm passionate about. Like if you're going to partner with organizations and you want to be the company that is relieving this burden, like that's your goal, the company needs to see you in this, kind of a trusted advisor type role. Like they need to trust you that, number one, that you can do the work, or actually, number one, what you're talking about. Number two, you can do the work. And I think, have that as your sales strategy to go in and say, okay, what is it that's your actual problem? And instead of a product that solves the solution, it's us as the company can come alongside you and take that problem away while you focus on things that are more important to the business.
Brilliant. Now, if we switch topics just slightly, we've got a little bit of another slide we want to tee up here where we go a slightly different direction. We're going to be looking at basically why people are currently renting space in colos and for what reasons. So maybe you could kind of take us through this one. This one's maybe visually a little more straightforward, but some interesting results in there.
Yeah, so I think as a data center industry, and this again speaks to misalignment, but as a data center industry, if you just base this off of like what the conferences are talking about, right? Like the data center industry is all about chasing fads, it seems. They seemingly are chasing relevance. Even though there is plenty of relevance in the data center industry, it seems they're always kind of chasing the next thing. And one side effect of that is what you see on the screen here. Let me explain. So time and time again, we've asked this question of enterprises: if you lease space from a data center provider, why? What's the reason behind it? And like, no matter how we ask this question, the number one reason is always either disaster recovery or to improve reliability. And it's usually like if we force people to pick one, it'll be disaster recovery. And what's interesting about that is like, if you've been to a data center conference in the last 5 years, you've probably not heard the word disaster recovery, the words disaster recovery, like in all 5 of those years. Like it's just not a conversation that the data center industry is having anymore. And to me, this seems like a very large oversight. Like this needs to be, like, I know it's not a sexy topic. That's going to hurt your feelings, Veeam, sorry. But backups, like, it can be a challenging conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, like, people don't get excited about backups like they do, perhaps the new cloud product or the new, container product or whatever it is. But I would argue that even though it's maybe not sexy or exciting, it's critically important to businesses. And so I think to the extent that the data center industry can kind of come back to basics and say, you know what, disaster recovery, that's where we need to start. All these other fun topics of like IoT and edge and all that sort of thing, we can have those conversations, but let's start with disaster recovery because that's why people are buying from us anyway. Let's tell companies how we can relieve that burden of disaster recovery and then allow them to focus on other things, which are hopefully, maybe the more interesting conversations.
And it makes sense if you think about sort of, I'll broaden it out to availability overall, meaning, replication, disaster recovery, backup and recovery, perhaps commingled in there is migration. Those are sort of back office kinds of services. But if you think of any utility, it's never interesting while you have it. And it's incredibly apparent when you don't. Like if the lights go off, if the power goes out, if the water is not functioning properly, then all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, this is really important. When it was functioning, that's what we expect. It wasn't red alert because that was what we wanted to have happened. And thankfully, most of the time it is what's happening. I guess one of the other little wrinkles now, besides a lot of different scenarios now that we'll touch upon where we're all working from different locations, is rise of cyber now puts a little bit different spin or an additional burden on disaster recovery, because in addition to natural disasters, some man-made disasters, we have a very specific kind of man-made disaster in cyber threats, ransomware, that all of a sudden go from a surface level of we could lose a few machines, we could lose a site, to worst case scenario, we've got an attack surface of 100% of our critical data that now has been compromised and we need to get it back rapidly. But your point is really valid, because I have been, like I'm sure you have as well, to a lot of conferences, and the lead hasn't been really either of the top two, which are kind of by a fairly wide margin up on the list, which is DR, disaster recovery, and or improving reliability. And you get down into some of these other ones, it's interesting, some of the things that might sound a little snazzier, get a little bit more buzz from a press perspective, but clearly they're far lower down the list, meaning polling at half or even a third of what the top two responses are.
Yeah. I mean, and to the point of like, the data center industry itself and the conferences, and obviously, this is, I'm using conferences as a thing to point at as what the topics are, but it's the same whether you meet with providers in person or whether you're talking to them at conferences. But, to a point, disaster recovery and reliability, like you can think of these as solved problems. Right? Like, so, like we all hopefully know that disaster recovery is something that we should be addressing. We all know that reliability is something that we should be addressing. The data center industry has long since believed that reliability is something that they can do better than enterprises can do themselves. I would also say disaster recovery is something that specifically the retail end of data centers have long since believed that they can do better than enterprises. And so to an extent, it's a solved problem, meaning that people, think, well, we don't have to talk about this anymore. Everybody gets it. But clearly from our service, like they don't. And so, it's one of those things where even though, like to you, it might be a boring conversation, but like to your target audience, it's still a very important conversation, still one that needs to be had. Even if it's just, like a conversation starter. And then move on to, whatever the other pain points are. But at least, disaster recovery is top of mind. So if I'm your sales leader, that's where I'm starting, right? I always start there because we know it's top of mind. And, I would also offer, and I'm sure you would echo this as well, that like, even though we would consider disaster recovery, actually, you'll probably push back at the notion of a solved problem. It's a known problem, maybe is a better word. Because what I was going to say is when you dig into it, many organizations believe their disaster recovery is situated. In reality, it's not. And so I would say that, like if you go digging and flipping over stones, you're likely to find a few things that you're not happy about. And that's wonderful news actually for the service provider industry, because they can come in and help.
Yeah, we found that too in our own global survey of over 1,500 organizations. We did it blind, meaning we didn't advertise it was Veeam behind the survey. And the number one reason to switch backup and recovery products was to improve backup success. meaning the number one reason you would switch a product is so that the product would do what you bought and deployed the product to do.
Right.
And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but to your point, it shows the challenge. It shows the stress that everyone's under from amount of data, criticality of SLAs, etc. So I want to hit two quick things. Want to go back to the map. I think we've got like 8 or something more countries that have recently popped up. We've got Bolivia, Nairobi, Kenya, France, Senegal, Toronto, Indonesia, Sweden. Yeah, it's always just shocking to us, Dan, and I mean pleasantly shocking, just the Asia Pacific, Middle East, European, South American residents that this live stream has continued to have. So thank you all for that. Continue to populate that, and we'll come back and visit if time permits. But I also want to do a shout out. Veeam has a couple pieces of 451 research that we've got the republish rights for. And so what I want to do is bring up a QR code here. This is around taking control of your Office 365 data. And I chose this one in particular to emphasize because it's really a lot of like what you were just describing, where people assume that things are covered, that things are going to be well handled, that they don't have to worry about it. In reality, that might actually not be as well protected as you might think. So what I mean by that is one of the stats in there, I put it off to the side here, 60% of sensitive cloud data is stored in Office documents, and 75%, 3/4 of that is not backed up. You don't have to be too strong on algebra to know that if more than half of sensitive data is in one kind of platform, and in that one kind of platform or portfolio, meaning Office 365, if 3 out of 4 aren't backing that up, you are clearly running at risk. So encourage people to scan this. It's a no charge download document from 451 Research. Again, take control of your Office 365 data. So with that,
doesn't Microsoft back up Office 365 for me?
Well, yes and no, right? That's the thing, is that it's never that binary. I mean, yes, absolutely something is done by the provider. I'll take Exchange as a specific example. Is it exactly like what you probably were doing for Exchange on premises? Meaning, do you have that same level of granularity? Do you have that same level of retention that you could go back to? And the answer is majority of the time, meaning vast majority of the time, no. So one of the reasons I would encourage people to look at that document, in addition to obviously Veeam, we have a solution there, is just get educated. Right? Don't be sort of naive to the situation. If you make a decision after having the facts to do or not do something, that's fine, but just understand the reality of what that situation is. So this document, I think, can really help educate people.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I know we didn't plan on talking about this specifically, but just a quick note on that. It's always interesting when I talk about a Veeam type solution or some other solution to back up Office 365. My rebuttal there is always the rebuttal I get. Well, I mean, you don't need to do that because Microsoft takes care of it. And what I would offer is, just as a quick critique of that, is that that's essentially just using one medium for your backup. And so, we've long since had the idea of at least having 2 or 3 places where you back things up. You're replicating it offsite. Essentially leaving it in O365 is not replicating it offsite. So there's plenty of things to think about here. And I would just encourage you, if your knee-jerk rebuttal is, well, Microsoft takes care of that for me, read the document.
Yeah, great point. And at Veeam, we love our 3-2-1 rule. We even expanded that to 3-2-1-1-0. And I'll let people look up what those other digits are. It's essentially a zip code if you're from the United States. Let's switch gears quickly to our last topic around office environments. And you've got a great graphic here I think is worth kind of parsing through.
Yeah, and this was actually a curveball that I threw Dave. So this is going to be fun. Like I'm anxious to just hear his reactions and thoughts on this. This is kind of more high level. There's no real solution or solved question here, but this is really just more to be a thought-provoking thing as we have been navigating COVID and sort of the effects here. One of the things that 451 has done are a number of what we call flash surveys, where we have polled enterprises specifically just asking about the effects of COVID-19 and how businesses are thinking about this in many different ways. So it goes well beyond technology, as you can see here on the screen. And so one of the things that we have unearthed is that close to 50% of organizations are considering doing away and or just reducing their office footprint. And on the surface, maybe that doesn't sound terribly interesting to IT people, but here's what I would ask. Our research continues to show that companies use server rooms and server closets for critical data. Oftentimes, the workloads that are associated with those server rooms and closets are, like localized data, print servers, interconnection routing, IoT data collection devices. Like it's a full myriad of things, but it always are local applications. Or hinges around local applications, I should say. And so the question is, if those offices go away, what happens to those workloads? There's a few of them that I think you and I could debate can just go away. There's a few of them that I'm just not quite sure what we do with. And so I think there's some opportunities here for a couple of different industries. Cloud industry seems like an obvious place to put some of those workloads. Localized data centers, like regionally close data centers could be another option, one that I would personally champion. But anyway, so to kind of distill all this down to a question, do more dispersed employees demand a more dispersed infrastructure? And that's sort of the question that I want to kind of tee that up with. So Dave, let me just throw it out to you. React to that, sir.
Yeah, I would say short answer is yes. And the qualified answer is yes, but, and you've alluded to it, yes, but things are going to have to change. Obviously, centralization for some of this could still remain, and possibly, depending on the workload, depending on the requirements involved, could be the right choice. This might very much force a shift to increase in, say, SaaS-based services or moving to born in the cloud applications. So maybe that accelerates lift and shift. Maybe that accelerates brand new native applications in the cloud. And then the other aspect of that is I think it puts the spotlight on security, meaning things like virtual private networks, VPNs, to make sure that if you're remote, that you are secure, that if you're working off of a laptop in your home environment, that you're protecting that laptop, because now you have assets that are being created and housed outside of the data center. So I actually would describe it as increasing the scope. I think part of the challenge that we've been talking about here is not that these problems are getting easier. In fact, in some regards, they're getting more complex because you have more workloads existing in more environments.
Mm-hmm.
So as we begin to wrap up, a little send ahead. Dan, I know you've got a conference at 451 that's coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our yearly conference is called HCTS. Hosting Cloud and Transformation Summit is what that stands for, although we basically just call it by its initials these days. That's coming up on October 6th. Now, what's interesting about this is generally a conference that's limited just to business execs. We do it in Vegas. It's intentionally small gathering. Lots of great opportunities for networking at that event. This year, though, because of COVID-19, we're expanding and allowing basically all types of businesses and all types of roles of individuals to attend this event. And so if you've enjoyed the research pieces that you've seen today and would like to hear a similar insight and discussions to what we've had here today, I would encourage you to check out HCTS and join us again starting October 6th.
Awesome. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Veeam Live that's coming up in October. In fact, we're going to have a couple different instances of this in the Americas, October 20th, in Asia Pacific, Japan, November 10th, in the EMEA Theater, November the 12th. Here are the details here, and you can see the URL to register. We'll leave that up on the screen. And as we do, also mention that VMworld starts tomorrow, is taking place, and Veeam will have a virtual party. We're all remote, but we're going to have DJ Diesel, aka Shaquille O'Neal, being the spin meister, the DJ, for a party that we're going to have virtually or remotely tomorrow. There's still some limited registration spots that are left, so I encourage you to look up that. Dan, I want to thank you for taking some time out to visit with us, and certainly want to thank everyone across the globe for your interest. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Bye now.
See you guys.